Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Welcome to another episode of the Australian Retirement Podcast. I'm pleased to be here again with friend and co-host James O'Reilly.
Hello,
Welcome,
mate.
James.
I've just realised whenever I introduce you, I just introduce you as my co-host, and you always introduce me as friend and co-host.
Putting it out there this time of year. A lot of friendship going around. I'm a bit excited and a little bit stressed about this episode. And I think the best way to start is just say help. This episode we're responding to, we've had a lot of questions and also a lot of comments on YouTube where a lot of people are watching, and please follow us, subscribe, and make sure you're getting all those updates every Thursday. I think it's Thursday afternoon. But this one, and we have spent a lot of time focusing on maximising retirement benefits, maximising superannuation, but not necessarily looking at those people and going deeper on those people that may be feeling despondent or not as confident about being able to fund their own retirement. So in this episode, we've called it When a Self-Funded Retirement Seems Impossible. What we're going to go through is 3 different scenarios. And James is a whiz on what we call X-Plan or X-Tools. There's a few different words. It's an incredibly powerful CRM system and modeling system used by financial advisors. We're going to have a link and a screenshot and a Loom video in the show notes that will walk through some of these scenarios rather than doing them live on air. But essentially going through each of these scenarios, talking about what retirement can look like for each of these families, and some of the tips and traps around those. So anything to add before I start quizzing you, James?
You've done a good job of that, mate. Other than to say that, this is something that we're really looking forward to doing because we recognise that so much of these conversations, so much of our content is centred around maximising superannuation caps and just clearing mortgages more aggressively. But we understand, especially right now, with cost of living where it is, interest rates where they are. A lot of Aussies practically can't do that, and we acknowledge that it at times that could feel a little bit frustrating when all the advice is save more and use all of your surplus savings to do these things.
Cap. Yeah, it doesn't help if you don't have $120,000.
That's right. Yeah. So from our end, we want this to be as valuable as possible, and above all else, I really hope that it gives people a renewed sense of confidence and belief that you might be further along the path than you think you are, or closer to what you're looking for. Perhaps fewer compromises you need.
And I really like this. One of my old coaches used to call things scenarios when we were training. So I'm happy to delve into scenario 1 here. So I'm going to outline this couple and what their situation looks like. And James is going to go into a bit of detail what retirement's going to look like, what some slight changes here and there could be. And then I'm going to quiz him on a few ways to improve or slow down that retirement strategy. So
I think the word is grill. You're going to
grill, yes. Scenario number 1, we have a couple, age 45, incomes of $80,000 and $60,000 gross incomes. Home worth $80,000. I think ticking back to that, they're not saving anything at the moment. After tax, it all goes away. No surplus cash flow.
Just to clarify that the home value is $800,000.
Yeah, $800,000 with a mortgage of $500,000 and repayments, making the minimum repayments of $3,100 per month. Thanks to interest rates, their superannuation balances, and it doesn't matter which fund they're in, $120,000 and $70,000, which on the top looks probably low for age 45, maybe self-employed or contractors at some point, and both invested into a growth risk profile within their super funds, and we'll go into why that's important later on. They plan to stop working at 67 years of age and expect the same level of spending in retirement. So my big question to start the grilling is, where is this couple headed? Should they be despondent?
No, they definitely shouldn't be. This is a really common couple. I think. Yes, you're right. The super balances might be perhaps a little bit lower than your average 45-year-old if you've got 2 people that are both working on presumably full-time wages or close to full-time wages.
And maybe there's a resource that shows the median super balance for different age groups. So maybe we'll drop that in the show notes too.
Good call. a couple like this could easily be looking at their future and saying, hey, we're not entirely sure how we're going to go because we're sitting down with our friends who have got 300,000 in superannuation or totally different numbers, and they have higher incomes, or they're really on their way to clearing our mortgage, whereas we only got our home a few years ago and we've still got a big mortgage right now.
They call them the Joneses, don't they?
That's right. Yeah, correct. But the immediate observations are actually that if this couple is going to be fine. This couple, by our numbers, by the time that they get to age 67, they will have their superannuation will have continued to bubble along in the background, and it comes out to have a pretty healthy rate. So I'll confirm the balance, but it's in excess of $800,000 in today's dollars.
In combined superannuation money.
Correct. Yeah. And I must emphasize that today's dollars does matter significantly when we're talking about 22 years into the future. If you're thinking about what a $100 bill would buy 22 years ago, it's a lot more than it will buy today. And similarly, the same is true, of course, when we're talking about 22 years into the future. So $800,000 balance, a little bit more, confirm that number in today's dollars when they want to retire at age 67. And we've also, assuming that their expenses continue unchanged.
And that's about 45,000.
More, it's quite a bit more, because so if their expenses continue unchanged, the only change there is that we said $3,100 a month of repayments. The modelling here is that the loan would end at age 65.
And how important is that?
Well, it's critical in the sense that if your loan is not completed by the time that you retire, well, we've got a new problem because you've still got another, let's say $37,000 of repayments every year that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And of course, that's eroding your loan.
Yep.
But we often get to this point too when we're looking at individuals like this that we describe as a crossover period. And it's especially for people that take loans later in life. I've spoken about this on the podcast before, whereby you might have you've for whatever reason, whether it's it might be separation or just it took a little bit longer for you than was intended. You've bought your home at, let's say, 55 or something along those lines, and by 65, just 67, you're still going to have a home loan. Yeah. So what we end up with is that crossover period where your super balance exceeds your home loan. Yeah. And hopefully that happens ideally in your early 60s. You don't want that to happen in your mid to late 60s, of course. And if that happens in your early 60s, and that leaves a pure around 5+ years in order for you to boost your retirement savings, knowing that when I get to retirement, I'm going to use a big chunk of my super to just clear the mortgage, and they'll get rid of that $37,000 a year cost.
And that's completely okay. And that's a lot of the talk, a lot of the comments, a lot of the headlines are about the incredible value, which isn't possible for everyone, of having your own home when you get to retirement. Mm-hmm. And I think what we tend to, and this isn't even modeled into this example, is that if this couple decide to downsize or change home at some point, that can change the game completely as well. But the value of that equity in your home can't be just forgotten about. And not being considered in your asset base.
Yeah. So to confirm, we finish up with in today's dollars about $850,000 in retirement. That's no voluntary contributions at all. That's in a scenario where these 45-year-olds continue to have their expenses meet their income the whole way, which realistically is unlikely because you'll hopefully have kids growing up and taking less food out of the refrigerator. You'll have hopefully in time, mortgage rates are a little bit more palatable than they are right now, but that remains to be seen. On the balance, it's likely that we are going to see, if anything, probably a negative adjustment for two 45-year-olds as they move toward retirement age.
And is the age pension playing a role?
Oh, yeah, hugely. Yeah.
And how important is the age pension when we're looking at?
Incredibly. Yeah. So to be clear, when we're looking at these numbers, from age 67, you've got around about $850,000 of super balance. Again, money just being in a growth risk profile. That falls, and it falls down to, I think by age 86, there's still about $320,000 left. Again, today's dollars, which is pretty good. Right? Yeah. It's pretty good. Now, the reason why it's able to sustain itself for so long is because as that super balance starts to fall, the age pension is stepping up and offering more and more benefit.
So you probably get next to nothing at the beginning of your retirement if you have 850. I think the cap is
couple over a million, over a mil,
1.047 or somewhere around that. We'll put that in the show notes as well. So you'll be getting a little bit of a part pension, but not a significant amount. But that grows.
That's right. Yeah, it grows quickly. In fact, now you have to, again, all these numbers have been just increased with CPI. So they might seem high, but bear in mind that it's their today's terms, so age pension terms, it's just CPI indexed. So for these individuals in the first year, they're going to only get around about $30,000 of their close to $130,000 of expenses funded from the age pension. Now, as a reminder, their expenses are lower than 130, but CPI has increased that number pretty significantly. So realistically, you're getting around about 26%, 25% or thereabouts.
Yeah.
But what happens is that means you need to be more erosive on the super balance. So your pension income for the first year from the super fund is like $100,000.
Yeah.
But as you take that large chunk out, what happens is your super balance is falling, and that means that your age pension entitlement is growing.
Increasing, yeah.
So you fast forward a decade, and the age pension entitlement has gone from $30,000 to $110,000 or to $90,000. I'm sorry. Now, again, that might sound extremely high. Bear in mind, that's correct. It's future money. But that said, you can see how so much higher a portion of that, call it $130,000, $140,000 a year of expenses, is now getting funded through the age pension. And I think that's one of the great things about this system is that it is means tested, because it ensures that people who are who need it most are able to get access to the full amount.
I mean, a big question here would be, what if their circumstances change? They're 45. There's every chance of pay rises, and is there a comparison between, say, putting more against the home loan versus putting money into super sooner? And yeah, what's the impact of salary increases?
Mm-hmm. Great question. No. So we've intentionally kept this as conservative as possible. So we assume that both expenses and salary rise at the same clip, which is an ultra conservative assumption.
Yeah.
But yes, there is a big difference if incomes increase. I put in a nominal 10K each and said, what happens if their income's increased by 10K each, and they directed that surplus to the home loan? And guess what? They're screamingly better. And now if you direct that surplus to superannuation instead of the home loan, they're better still. They're better again as a combination of higher returns in the super fund, getting the tax deduction straight away from presumably putting the money through concessionally. And I'll show in the show notes as we're talking, I'll do a recording to outline what those differences are.
And probably importantly, we put the assumptions that we've used in this modelling as well, in terms of long-term average returns, interest rates, because all those assumptions and inputs are incredibly important. And that probably links to this idea of what are ways to accelerate outside of, if you can't control your income. What are ways we can accelerate this strategy? Can you tell us about they're in a growth risk profile?
Yeah.
How important your risk profile? Well, a lot of people ignore it or try not to think too much about it or try to switch between at different times. What role does your risk profile play in this?
It's huge. It's so big, because the internal earnings of that superannuation fund over the next 22 years are going to be significantly
compound
enhanced.
on compound.
So as we're doing this, I might take the opportunity to just adjust that modeling to reflect that, and let's see what it does. We know what it's going to do, but let's get the specific numbers. But coming back to income. Yes, their income might be fixed, and there are some roles. I think about a teacher, for example. I've got a great friend who's a teacher, and their income is just on rails. Like, unless they want to take more responsibility, a leadership position, or whatever, their whole income trajectory is just mapped out perfectly.
Between 3 and 7% increases every year.
That's right.
Perpetuity,
yeah, but for that's an exception for most people.
It's lumpy.
Yeah. And most people, we've talked about this before. Most people do have more capacity to control their income than they realize. You just have to zoom out a little bit.
It's not always working more.
Not always, no. So if you're thinking about what capacity you have to change your income by, 10% over the next 3 months, that might be extremely limited. But if you want to increase your income by 10% over the next 2 years, that's extremely possible. And indeed, I said that's a poor example. If we said 20% or 30% over the next 3 years, which is much more significant than bumping it up by 10% over the next few months, people have the longer time frame you have, the more capacity you have to materially change your income. And sometimes that's going to mean some tough decisions in terms of the duties that you do, the role that you do, perhaps in some cases, maybe even the career that you're in. But if you're 45 and we're looking to 67 and trying to make the most of this, we would need to ask the question, are you both in the right roles that are going to give you the best growth here?
maybe this is a perfect time to skip to scenario 2.
Yeah. Yeah, let's keep moving.
And this is someone very much closer to retirement or much closer to intended retirement. So in this case, we've got an individual, male, well, not male or female, doesn't matter which option.
Assign them a sex, mate.
Yeah, trying to keep this anonymous. 64 years of age, income of $70,000 a year, has a home worth $800,000, a mortgage at 64 of $200,000, making the minimum repayments of $1,800 per fortnight, a super balance of $140,000 invested in a moderate risk profile. So if you think about growth is at one end, cash is at the other end, moderate sits ultimately in the middle. It's what you'd probably consider to be a balanced portfolio, which isn't necessarily intuitive, that is usually either tilted towards defensive assets or balanced 50-50 between the two. $20,000 in cash and $5,000 per annum in savings, which are directed into additional mortgage repayments. Again, we're assuming this person stops working at 67 being a key age because that's the age, the Centrelink age, pension age, and the age at which other benefits and kind of an accepted retirement age, even though the trends are showing people retiring earlier. And I think key here is that their expenses are unchanged in retirement. Mm-hmm. So they're not decreasing or increasing. I have this conversation all the time with clients too, which is you think when you retire, all your your mortgage and your school fees might go, but suddenly I think you brought this up too. Suddenly you spend more time at the coffee shop, more time at the newsagent, more time at the bookshop, and all these other expenses get introduced that you wouldn't.
Passport comes out
for. Exactly. So for scenario 2, where's this person headed? What's retirement going to look like? They got 3 years, and what should they be expecting, and what changes could we be making in this period of time as well?
Well, once again, they're in a better situation than you might realize. I mean, at first glance here,
how's that possible?
Well, at first glance here, you look at this individual. You say, okay, 64, income of $70,000, but of course making these minimum repayments of $1,800 per month. Well, if we can get that loan cleared, that's going to free up $1,800 a month of loan repayments, which is $21,600 a year.
Seems to be a common story here, and probably so much when interest rates have increased so much in the last few years.
Absolutely, yeah. And so we think about if this individual is firstly they're saving a little bit of money, which means that by the time they hit their $70,000, by the time you have that whittled away from a tax viewpoint, you're left with about $57,000. Yeah. Then we bear in mind that around $21,000 is getting taken away straight into loan repayments.
Yeah,
that's bringing $57,000 down to $36,000.
Yeah,
and then we consider that there's $5,000 that they're saving a year. They're now at $31,000 of expenses after their loan is cleared. Yeah, which is good. This is good. This is a relatively disciplined individual spending about $600 a week. Presumably, it says single, so they are. So in this scenario, we're going to get that crossover point that we spoke about in the previous in that previous chat with the scenario 1, which is that your super balance is going to grow. Currently, it's at $140K and the mortgage at $200K.
Yeah.
But over 3 more years of contributions plus growth, that super balance is going to go up to
pretty significantly.
Yeah, closer to $200K. Yep. And the mortgage is going to be coming down as a combination of the $21,600 of payments and then also the $5,000 of additional voluntary contribution. Now, one of the great things about time when it comes to either a mortgage and indeed time when it comes to super is that they're both accelerating more quickly, albeit in opposite directions. So the biggest improvement, that's right. The last few years of your mortgage, you will pay off the highest amount of capital with your repayments because the amount that you owe is lower. And therefore, the interest is lower. So a larger part of that $21,000 every year is going toward just straight clearing that mortgage. So at $200,000 mortgage right now, we'll assume 6% interest, which is pretty standard. About $12,000 of that 22 is interest, but that means that $10K every year is this mortgage is coming down. So over 3 years, it's going to come from $200 down to $170, and commensurately the inverse for his contributions.
And what did their income look like in this situation? We said 70 minus expenses are unchanged, so it's going to be about $45,000.
Yeah, less. It's about $33,000 or thereabout, $32,000 once we clear the once we clear the home loan.
Yeah.
So the key thing, firstly, is to clear the home loan.
Yeah.
And if we've cleared the home loan because the super balance exceeds, we're going to have a very small super balance, but we are going to have someone who has wiped their mortgage and can rely almost exclusively on the age pension to meet the vast majority of their income needs. Now, granted, they're only going to have around about a $30,000 super balance here, which is a tiny, tiny amount of compared to where you would like to be.
Yeah.
But having said that, the power of having no mortgage in retirement and also being able to reutilize, like if you had perhaps some more time to work, for example, and you can utilize having no mortgage to boost your super balance, that's really helpful. A, or B, just the position of knowing that when you move into retirement, you don't have that cost hanging over you is a huge one.
I think one of the things I see consistently in these case studies is that we forget about the investment and the investment consideration and the risk profile discussion. But there's data, and we'll track this down and share it in the show notes as well, that shows that I think it's something like only 20% of your returns on your assets come during your working life, and the vast majority, so around 50 to 60%, actually come once you retire. So the compounding once you retire keeps you kind of tracking along, as well as then getting the support from something like the age pension.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, in reality, like we've got a scenario here underneath. What about if their expenses are 10K higher owing to holidays, et cetera? Yeah. Well, you and I know perfectly well what this looks like. It's not possible.
Becomes challenging.
That super balance will be eroded within a matter of years, and then the holidays will all come to an end, and this individual will actually have less money coming in than before because the only entitlement they have is the age pension. And being a homeowner, even without a mortgage, a homeowner on just the age pension with no financial flexibility, because if anything goes wrong, how are you funding that other than, for example, a reverse mortgage or downsizing? Like that's not a good situation to be in. So if this individual, presented to us, my advice would most likely be, can we find a way whereby you would be willing to work after 67?
Yeah. And how would you do that with like data, show this modeling live?
Yeah, that's right. If this, then that. If you are able to work, for example, even part-time from 67 through to 69 or 70, noting that, of course, at this point, your home loan we can have wiped, so we don't need to worry about that. Now, we've got a reasonable amount of income coming in. We can we can definitively keep them below, I'd like to think, the threshold, so they can still receive the full age pension, but do some work which really is just allowing them to save more money for the next 10, 15 years. Now, sometimes they might say, no, absolutely not. I'm
done.
I'm done. Yep.
Refer to prior episode.
But other times they might say, what I realize is that I'm actually done doing this kind of work. This work is exhausting. I've done it for a long time. I need a break more than anyone, and it is time to call it. My experience is that at this age, particularly for someone who is at 70K, which is a low income for someone working full time in their 60s, often a change of employment and doing something different can be that scenario, saying, actually, I'm enjoying this work
Boost
now.
Income, increase longevity.
It's feeling more purposeful. I'd actually, at this rate, I'd be happy to work maybe even full time beyond 67 for a year or so. And all of that money really is just getting saved and enabling us to ultimately have a bigger buffer when we enter retirement.
I find that interesting as well. So this probably comes below. There's a thing called the ASFA. Comfortable.
It's hard to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I try to go through the full acronym, but we love acronyms in financial services. So the ASFA comfortable retirement threshold, and they say that's about $51,000 for a couple, $51,000 for a single, $72,000 for a couple. So this would kind of fall below that comfortable standard. And interesting, the comfortable standard would have small amounts of travel, car changes, eating out a little bit more regularly, as opposed to this situation, which would be solely reliant on the age pension. So, and these aren't perfect. They're as anything, they're an estimate and a model, but I think that's always good and a good comparison to have there as well.
I think it speaks to the idea, though, of understanding what your expenses are. We've drilled that many, many times, know exactly where they are, but also age pension can be
super
really significant, and it becomes increasingly significant when your expenses are lower. Because if you have low costs, then a higher portion or proportion of your overall expenses are going to be funded by the age pension. And if we have a higher proportion of money of your expenses funded by the age pension, that's less reliance on your money to fund your retirement.
And perfect segue to delve into our final scenario.
Yeah, let's do it.
So individual again, let's say female, age 67 and just retired. Expenses are $50,000 per annum, so very close to that ask for comfortable retirement. Home of $800,000. Now, here's the key one. No mortgage whatsoever. A super balance of $400,000. And that, I think from memory, the numbers around median super balance at retirement is about $350 to $400. So right on that median. Invested in a moderate, which we say is about a 50-50 split between defensive and growth assets, with $20,000 in cash. And that $50,000 in expenses is going to continue for retirement. How long is the money going to last? How long can we keep generating that income for?
A long time. Again, looking at present value and how things are going to track out, we start off with the retirement balance, of course, is falling, and it continues to fall. At age 82, I'll just make sure I've got this right. At age 82, we're left with around. At age 80, we're left with around $200,000, about $212,000 again in today's dollars. I think there's no point in inflating it to 400 when it's only 200 in today's dollars. So if we continue on this trajectory, we've got 100,000 at age 86. We're realistically looking at around age 89 before the money is completely extinguished.
Yep.
And as a reminder, extinguished means that
die with zero.
Yeah, that's right. Well, she's still got her home, to be fair.
Yeah. That's assuming nothing changes with the house. Again, these are big ones, and then aged care and all these other considerations come in. This is just purely modelling the income drawdown and the income earning potential from the investable assets.
That's exactly right.
And that's where advice comes in, and the role and the opportunities that come with that, which can be emotional, and that's probably a part of another episode we'll do as well. That parting with one's house can be impactful, but very challenging.
Yeah. I must admit, when I do this modeling, I often find myself just kind of scratching my head at that narrative that I think happens so often. We hear so often, which is like, you need $1 million to retire comfortably. Now, to retire really comfortably, yeah, that's true. And of course, this person is an individual, rather than, so of course costs are going to be a little bit lower. They are a homeowner, so again, more of the same. We don't have some of those other expenses that unfortunately some Australians are going to have as they retire. But this individual is going to be able to fund basically to life expectancy on her $50,000 a year with just $400,000 of superannuation balance. That's pretty cool, you know.
Yeah, and if she managed to downsize at some point, then she's going to release an even bigger lump of capital and have the potential to spend even more, or travel more, or pursue other activities more.
Correct. Yeah. So like this is someone retiring on $1,000 a week. That's a reasonable amount of money. It's not heaps, but it is a reasonable amount of money for someone who's been presumably working quite a few years. I presume their income is not crazy high, because with respect, if it was, I don't need to be respectful to a fake individual. I just realized, so I don't need to use that word, because if it was so high, then they'd probably have more in super via SG payments and the like.
Yep.
So this is probably someone that's been on a low to moderate income for a number of years, and has got their balance there. But even so, that idea of do you need $1 million for retirement? Well, if your expenses are $1,000 a week total, then the answer is absolutely not. We're looking at a 65-year-old who, 67, I beg your pardon, I'll clarify the age, 67, who is able to live comfortably with just a $400,000 super balance.
And I'd love to hear from listeners' comments, questions about whether they'd like an episode that's kind of that could go through something like what's retirement look like with $500,000, $1 million, or $2 million, and we can provide some multiple examples and outcomes of that. Because the impact of the income that you need and the risk that you're taking with your capital can complete and can be so impactful on what your retirement actually looks like.
Yeah.
Have you got anything to leave us with from this episode?
I think it speaks to the idea of, particularly if your expenses are low, then you would be surprised that you may be surprised about how little an account balance you can have in retirement and assets saved and still have a pretty comfortable retirement. Now, people set their own walls, of course. If you've got a low balance, it's very likely that you probably also have a low retirement balance. You probably have low spending habits too, because that's probably a reflection of having lived quite frugally over the years on a lower income.
Yeah.
So having control over your expenses is incredibly important. I mean, I know if we use this same scenario and instead of having $50,000 a year, and maybe this individual loves travel, goes to 65,000, we are straight running out of money by about 78. So we've got about 13 years of runway, and then it's all depleted.
You've lost 11 years. Yep.
That's right.
From a 30% increase or thereabouts in your
correct
in your expenses.
Yeah. And it speaks to that idea again that like all of that increase is purely funded out of your own capital because age pension is already, for the most part being utilized. So understanding what your expenses are, number one. Number two, understanding what you can live on, and if $1,000 a week is achievable or a different number, if you're there, then certainly using a retirement calculator might really give you some pep in your step, because you don't necessarily need that unattainable $1 million mortgage.
I'm going to have to thank you for going deep on this one. We were talking about the skills on modelling calculators, and James is second to none and you'll see in the show notes and the live screen recording that we do as well.
I've got someone on my team who would object to that.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. That's why I'm not doing it. But this, I mean, it just can show how impactful just single decisions are and single outputs and the small things that you can focus on, even if you're not getting advice and you find it hard to afford advice, that the small things you can do. Anything you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, thanks. To add to that, please, it's not uncommon to have a sense of despondency around your finances. You might be going through this journey and listening to this podcast thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to get myself to a point that I'm self-funded? And you'd be hopefully really pleasantly surprised to learn that there's you do have a lot of options available. There are a lot of ways to move the lever, and especially if you're early. We have both, no doubt, had 1,000 people say to us, I know I have, I should have done this earlier. If you are in a situation whereby you do think that retirement is going to be tricky, it's going to be hard to self-fund, go and get advice sooner rather than later, because the compounding effect of doing that is really significant. And why wouldn't you want to know where you are? It might be a little bit confronting. You may ultimately hear some things that you didn't want to hear, but you're going to be better for knowing what your trajectory is. You're going to be better for knowing what your options are, and you're going to be better to be able to make a conscious choice as to what you're doing.
Man, what a perfect way to wrap up. Thanks, James, for joining me and carrying the load on this one. And yeah, always feel free, follow, subscribe, and send through any questions, case studies, anything you want us to cover. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Chat soon.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.